In this lesson, we're going to look at adding and subtracting fractions. Now, in order to add or subtract fractions, you must have one thing right away. They must have a common denominator between the fractions that you're trying to add or subtract. If they don't, you need to multiply by very well-chosen ones in order to make that happen. So if I look at this first example, I'm going to ask myself, what number can I bring the 4 and the 5 up to be common? Or what's a number that both 4 and 5 divide into? And hopefully you came to the conclusion of 20, which conveniently is 4 times 5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply each of these fractions by a version of a 1 that brings the denominator up to a 20. So I need to multiply the 4 by a 5. So you can see in orange here, 5 divided by 5 is 1. So I haven't ruined the value of that number. And then I need to multiply this one by a 4 over 4 because that's a version of a 1 as well. Now, after I set up these very well chosen ones, we can now multiply fractions. So 3 times 5 is going to be 15. And in the denominator is the 20 that we set out to achieve. Plus 2 times 4 is going to be 8 over 20. Now they have a common denominator. And so because they have a common denominator, I can now add those pieces together. So 15 over 20 plus 8 over 20 is going to be simply just add the numerators to get 23 over 20. Then I look to reduce. 23 and 20 do not share any common factors. So this is in simplified form. If I look at another example here of 3 over 8 plus 1 over 10, and I ask myself, what is a number that both of them will divide into? Well, I can use the same trick as before on the last question and take 8 multiplied by 10 and get 80. So while it's not going to be a lowest common denominator, it is a common denominator. So I'm going to set up the question exactly like I did in the previous example, and I'm going to multiply by my ones in order to get each number up to that common denominator of 80. So doing this out, 3 times 10 will be the 30 over 80 plus, and then this will be 8 over 80. They're now over the same denominator, so I can add the numerators. 30 plus 8 is 38. But I'm always looking to simplify, and I can see that 38 is divisible by 2, and 80 is divisible by 2. And so if I do that, I will get 19 over 40, which is now in lowest terms. There is no number that will divide 19 and 40. But if I attack this problem a different way, and I notice that between 8 and 10, yes, 80 is a common denominator, but it's not the lowest common denominator. And so I can use my tricks from finding the lowest common multiple or the least common multiple. And if you click here, you can get to that video that's on my channel as well. So if I look at 8, I know that 8 can be written as 2 times 2 times 2. And I know that 10 can be written as 5 times 2. And so I know that my lowest common multiple is going to be the 2 that they share. And I'll just highlight that. And then it's going to be everything that's left. So there's 2 2s from the 8, and there's a 5 from the 10. And so these 2s are right here. And then I'll just highlight that too so we can follow it. And then obviously there's only one 5. So this 5 is this 5. If I multiply these numbers out, 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. 8 times 5 is 40. That means that the lowest common denominator between 8 and 10 is actually 40, which we got above. Now we got there indirectly, but we can get there right away. So if I take 3 over 8, and I'm now going to multiply it by a well-chosen one, and 1 over 10, well, what do I need to multiply the 8 by to get to 40? That's going to be a 5. And in order to take 10 up to 40, I need to multiply that by a 4 over 4. Now if I multiply these fractions out, I'll get 15 over 40 plus 4 over 40, and they're over the same denominator. I can now add the numerators, so 15 plus 4 is 19, and I arrive to that simplified form right away. I have one last example to go over in this video. I want to handle subtraction. So the first thing I need to do is I need to use my lowest common multiple to figure out what is the lowest common denominator between 25 and 15 again. And I know it's not just going to be 25 multiplied by 15 because each of them is divisible by 5. So if I take 25 and I know that that is 5 times 5, and I know that 15 is going to be 5 times 3. So my lowest common multiple is going to be, what do they share? And so they share the 5. And then what's left over is a 5 and a 3. So I'll put each of those into that lowest common multiple as well, because that's going to end up being my lowest common denominator. And so if I multiply that out, 5 times 5 is 25, 25 times 3 is 75. I know that I can bring 25 and 15 both up to 75. So I'm going to figure out what one do I need to multiply by. And so what do I need to multiply 25 by to get it up to 75? Well, if I look over here and I'm struggling to see that, here's my lowest common multiple right here. And so 5 and 5, there's the 25, so I can see that it's missing a 3. And so simply if I multiply by 3 over 3, that will get that to 75. And then the next example, I'm looking at a denominator of 15. Well, here's 15 right here, 5 times 3. And so I can see that I'm missing that 5 right there. And so I need to multiply this by 5 over 5. Now multiplying my fractions out, 8 times 3 is going to be 24 over 75. Take away, this will be 10 over 75. And now that these are over the same denominator, I can copy down my denominator and subtract. 24 take away 10 is 14. 14's even, 75's odd. There are no numbers that divide into both of those, so this is a simplified final answer.